Bombardier with Paige Ellis. And back from the dead, Christina Partsinevelos on the rise of clothing retailer Jacob. But up next, why your after-hours work gossip could get you fired. The Toronto Symphony Orchestra canceled a performance by a Ukrainian-born pianist this week after she tweeted comments some are calling deeply offensive. Her tweets and the reaction by the orchestra have generated a lot of debate in this country, including how employers handle their workers' behavior outside office hours. For more on this, we turn to the founding partner at employment law firm Rudner McDonald. Stuart Rudner is here. Good to have you with us.
Great, thanks for having me.
Now, I understand that there is, it seems like an awfully old test to determine whether or not you ought to be given the boot.
Yeah, I mean, the law has not changed. What's changed are the facts that we're dealing with. And it's always been the case that by default, what you do on your own time is your own business. But if it impacts either the employer or the employment relationship, then you can be either dismissed or, either disciplined or dismissed.
Mm-hmm. So the criteria would be it has to hurt the company's reputation.
Right.
It has to render the employee unable to do their job. Mm-hmm. Co-workers have to either be unwilling to work with you or otherwise.
Yeah.
And then it may or may not have to be a serious breach of the criminal code?
And none of these are all separate, so it could be any one of these.
Ah, so they don't all have to apply.
No, this is not a 5-part test. It could be anything that impacts any one of those 5 tests that have been laid out over the years.
And so these are the tests that we've been looking at since 1967.
Yeah, long before Twitter and all of that.
Right. I can't imagine, though, that social media changes the rules.
The rules haven't changed. Like I said, it's the same law, new facts. And it used to be that somebody would go out after work and have a beer and complain about their boss. Mm-hmm. Now somebody goes on Twitter and complains about their boss. And the difference is, A, you've got an audience of millions, and B, there's a permanent record of exactly what they said. So we're seeing these laws applied more and more often than we ever did in the past.
Well, a group of Toronto firefighters recently fired for what was deemed unacceptable tweets. How big of a test must it be to say that this has impacted the public image of an organization or a group?
It'll depend very much on the company. You know, for some companies, negative comments may not hurt them. For others, if it's a public institution, if it's a school, anything like that, then their reputation is more sacred, if I can put it that way. Mm-hmm. But anytime, I mean, the best example I can think of is about 2 years old now, in the Amanda Todd situation, which was the 15-year-old girl who killed herself after years of bullying, which was a horrible situation. Somebody created a Facebook memorial page. Some guy went on that page and wrote, "Thank God that bad word is dead." Now, obviously a horrible comment, but also really dumb in the sense that it's easy to know who wrote it, and very easy to find out where they work. So within a day, somebody had contacted the company and said, "Do you know what your employee wrote online?" And they made the decision right away that they did not want to be associated with him, so they fired him.
I can imagine there's a lot of sleuthing that's going on social media as a result of all this.
There is, and that's, I mean, our firm works with employees and employers, so we see it from both sides. But one thing we tell our employer clients is you've got to be aware of what's being said about your company generally, but in particular what your employees are saying.
So how do you get it? Peel back the curtain for me here on this, because Facebook, you may or may not have to be a friend of someone to even know what they're saying in the first place.
Absolutely. And this sounds amazing, but it's true. It's amazing how many people forget that some of their friends on Facebook are their colleagues or even their supervisors. And yet they'll go on Facebook and badmouth the company and their bosses and everyone else. I have several files on the go right now where somebody saw something somebody else posted on Facebook, a colleague, took it to HR and said, "You should know about this." And then HR, of course, calls the legal, and we get involved. So it's often the quote-unquote Facebook friends who turn them in.
What about an employee who feels they've been unjustly fired?
So, and one thing I want to make very clear, just because you do something online that might be considered to be misconduct, that doesn't mean you can be fired. And I've spent far too much of my professional life talking about when you can and cannot be fired. I wrote a book called You're Fired, discussing the law. So just because there's misconduct, our laws are very clear that you don't look at that in isolation. You look at all, what the courts have said are all the relevant factors. And then you assess what kind of discipline is appropriate. So we always encourage our employer clients, you know, if you find out someone did something online that's inappropriate, you need to respond, but you need to respond cautiously and not fire them right away as a knee-jerk reaction.
Are there holes in legislation at this point that need to be filled?
It's really not the legislation that applies. It's really the common law, and the common law of just cause, when you can fire someone and when you can't. So I don't know if there are holes, but we're dealing with all new factual scenarios and trying to come to grips with. We're not talking about an employee stealing or something like that. We're talking about what they do on their own time, but how it impacts the company or their employment relationship.
What if, though, something that is said in social media or elsewhere is factually true?
Doesn't matter. I mean, that'd be a defense to a claim for defamation. So you couldn't sue them for defamation. But even if it was true, they could still be fired or disciplined because of what they said.
Stuart, interesting stuff. Thank you so much for your insight.
Thanks for having me.
Stuart Rudner is the founding partner at Rudner McDonald. Now, when we come back, women's retailer boutique Jacob is making a comeback after shutting down last year. We'll browse the aisles when we return.